Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow. With me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality, pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, and on TikTok. Folks, please do send in your greetings. Please do send in your comments. And please do tell us where you are watching from. We always like to know where around the United Kingdom or indeed the world you're watching in on. That's always very interesting for us. Now, we've got a lot to speak about today, and a lot's been happening, and obviously we've got to pick our stories fairly carefully. I know some of you will be interested in other things. If something's on your mind that you'd like to mention or talk about, please send in the comment and we'll give you our considered opinion on it. At the bottom of the hour, we do have a guest. It's our friend of the show all the way from Maryland in the USA, Avellina Balestri, to introduce us to another significant British historical figure that tends to have been lost to history, Major John Andre of the British forces in the American Rebellion period. And I was just saying to Avellina before we came on the show, you know, we seem to know more about the Americans in that particular conflict than we do of the British. So going to be speaking about that. So a political and an educational and overall an informative show lined up in the next hour. Now, folks, you can see that colourful flag behind me. United as one. And it's got the Union Jack in the middle, and then the four flags of the home nations, and a quite snazzy Union heart as well above. And thanks to Derek for designing that one and for gifting it to the program. That's much appreciated. Very colourful and a great slogan, United as one. Good. Cheers, Derek. Cheers. Let's say hello to some people. Debbie Beer first in tonight. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you back, Alistair. Thank you. Debbie, good to see you back also. Derek says, welcome back. Derek speaks about a fellow called Young Bob, who's a 17-year-old political activist who spoke at Dover when ourselves went down there. And he appears to have been arrested. I don't know the full story about that, but was that today, Derek? Do you know? Hi to Oksana. And hi to Paul, who we also bumped into when we were down in Dover. It was good to see you then, Paul. Greetings and good evening to you, because enough is enough and we must stop the boats. Well, Talking about stopping the boats, and Stephen actually says, do we know this Welsh flag was invented in the late 1950s? Yes, it was adopted as the official flag of Wales in the 1950s, a lot later than people seem to imagine. A very interesting story there. But talking about stopping the boats, that brings us into the first story that we want to briefly cover tonight. 98% of population growth is from migrants. And that was a story that appeared, on Saturday, the 27th of September, in the Daily Telegraph and in one or two other papers as well. And it points out here that some 1,235,254 people were estimated to have immigrated to the UK long term in the year to June 2024. So that's between June 23 and June 24. And if you subtract the number who emigrated, then the net migration that year was 738,718, which accounted for 97.8, let's say, percent of the UK's overall increase in population. So 98% of the population's increase was accounted for by immigration. And if you look at where did the 2% come from, that represented a mere 16,239 births over deaths of the resident population. So in other words, if there had been no immigration whatsoever and no emigration, then the population would only have risen by 16,239. Quite a manageable figure for the population to rise at. In fact, it would mean the population was relatively stable, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. However, it leapt up, if you're looking at the net figure, by well over 700,000. And if you're looking at the gross figure, which is in fact the correct figure we believe to look at, then it's well over 1.2 million people in that period. And the gross figure is the figure to look at, because the people who are coming in are not moving into the houses and the schools and the exact NHS waiting lists that the people moving out have vacated. Like there's not a seamless entrance in there. So the 1.2 million is the figure that's felt as the systemic shock throughout all the country. It's felt as a systemic shock to the housing stock, to the schools, to the hospitals. And you're disguising that systemic shock if you say, well, a huge number also left. Yes, a very large number also left, but the people coming in didn't seamlessly fit into those vacancies. They created their 1.2 million issue themselves. And so this fact that there's not a seamless transition of immigrants in and emigrants out isn't ever properly dealt with. People just imagine, oh, it's not as bad as anything because you've got to remember that all these people left. No. Wherever they left from, they weren't necessarily filled in those areas. Those spaces were not necessarily filled in those areas. They were felt elsewhere. But what is interesting is without immigration, the population would be essentially stable. And what on earth would be wrong with a stable population? It would make life an awful lot easier for politicians, for local councils, for everybody to be able to know that this year we're going to have approximately the same number of people as we had last year. And the year coming, we're going to have approximately the same number of people as there's always been. There's nothing wrong with keeping the population stable in that manner. But it does seem it does seem that our politicians don't seem to want to keep the population stable. And as we pointed out in our book, Protect Our Country, they use all sorts of sophistry to try to get us to imagine that we need a growing population. The idea being that this will somehow grow the economy. But as we also pointed out in that book, it doesn't really make any difference to the growth of the economy, and the costs involved of dealing with 1.2 million new people will often outweigh any kind of benefits that you're going to get from that. Paul says 12 new towns to be built in England. They're going to need a lot more than 12, Paul, as well, aren't they? And where are they going to build them? And who's going to be moving into them? And that's the thing, who's going to be moving into them? And that brings me actually to a good point that I want to bring up. It's a good point because I'm coming up with it. That's what I mean. It's a good point. I thought of it. So that's why it's a particularly good point. But I was watching a Sky News report today, and it's a 10-minute report about immigration into Scotland and how this is now becoming an issue. And well, I'm glad that they raised the point. They didn't bother contacting anybody who would be able to give our sorts of opinion on the matter. They contacted one or two people from NGOs to tell us why it's not a problem. However, not only that, but they also conflated legal immigration in with the problems represented by trying to find accommodation for refugees. And, you know, that's a different type of immigration. Legal immigration for jobs or study is a different kind of immigration from the asylum-seeking refugee immigration, which itself is also a different issue from straight-up illegal immigration. Anyway, it conflated all of these matters into something which wasn't particularly helpful. But something that made me think was that he had the interviewer, just a young fellow, he spoke to a woman on the street, just one of these vox pops, and she said that there's too many people coming in. And his response was, but aren't we just a multicultural society, though? As if that claim, which has got a certain amount of truth to it, as if that claim in itself meant that we should just accept what's happening. So I gave some wee bit of thought to that. And I thought to myself, you know, if your reasoning for more immigration is to say that we're a multicultural society, if that's your reason for wanting more of it or justifying it, the idea that because there's already people from all over the world living here, then for no other reason than that means we should accept more and more people from all over the world, and that more and more people from all over the world can and should come and live here. If that's your justification for immigration, then you are basically accepting, indeed you're advocating, that Scotland is to be inevitably changed into a completely different country with a completely different population from what it has been for hundreds of years. Because there are billions of foreigners in the world, and there's only around 5 million heritage Scots, by which I mean those of us who resemble those of us who have lived here for hundreds of years. There's really only 5 million of us. Now, if you look at official statistics, the population of Scotland is 5.5 million. But it will surprise you to know that half, that 500,000, are actually people who have been born outside of the United Kingdom, not outside of Scotland and the rest of the UK, no, born outside the United Kingdom. So there's only 5 million heritage Scots. And with that small number, it won't take very long at current rates of immigration, which is seeing a new town the size of East Kilbride come in long term into Scotland, then it won't take very long before the appearance of Scotland changes completely. And so, no, just because we happen to have various races in Scotland at the moment is absolutely no justification to keep the borders open and have even more of them, because there are literally billions of them. And there's only a precious few Scots who could easily be overtaken in numbers if the borders are kept open, as the SNP wants, as the Green Party wants. So we can and we should argue to restrict those numbers. And we can argue on cultural reasons, which are certainly very valid, such as incompatible customs and mannerisms and religions. We can argue on social reasons, such as the strain on housing and infrastructure and the inevitable overcrowding that such numbers will bring. And we can argue on economic levels, which is a very strong point as well, which says that often these people create a tax deficit, by which is meant that they cost more than they pay. All of these are valid and proper and convincing reasons, but we can also argue on the basis that this is Scotland, and we don't want Scotland to be transformed into what will become a foreign country with a foreign population full of people who do not resemble the heritage Scots who have lived here for hundreds and hundreds of years. We don't want Scotland transformed into a foreign country full of foreign peoples, plural. And that's also a perfectly valid and a perfectly legitimate and a perfectly convincing argument to speak about. And, you know, that's a very much a Scottish nationalist position. That's the sort of position that you should actually be hearing John Swinney speak about and quite openly advocate, because it's an absolutely legitimate fact. But of course, his brain has been captured by the sort of 1970s, 1980s nonsense of internationalism and open borders and globalism. And so he's not really a proper Scottish nationalist in the sense that people like myself are. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Hi to Robert. Good to see you in the house, Robert. Hi to TC and to Derek. Callum says, do you accept that Scotland has the right to self-determination if they vote a pro-Indie majority? Well, it would depend, wouldn't it? I mean, obviously, Scotland already has the right to self-determination, and we already self-determine our own future. And the people of Scotland, every time we go to the polls, we self-determine the future for Scotland. And hitherto, and hopefully for the long term, the people of Scotland will continue to self-determine in a way that keeps our United Kingdom together and which says that they want to continue to be part of it. So, you know, the Scots do have self-determination, and we do exercise it. And we exercise it in the only way that we can in the modern world, which is at the ballot box. And we constantly are voting to keep the UK together. And it's not true, Callum, that Keir Starmer has said that the Scottish people cannot democratically vote for it. He's saying that he simply doesn't want to engineer another referendum. And who would want to engineer another referendum given the problems that occurs? How that would come about, how another referendum would come about, is if there was somehow at the ballot box some kind of overwhelming demonstration of a real deep-seated need for Scottish independence, then circumstances might move in such a way that the politicians would have to find a way of having a referendum. But we're way beyond that now. I mean, that's touch wood, that's not going to happen again. And if it does happen again, there will be lots of Scottish people who won't support breaking up the United Kingdom, thank goodness. Yeah, Richie worries quite rightly that many British farms have been turned into housing estates or solar panel fields. Catherine watched the same program as I watched, the 10-minute documentary. Richie's crossed the Tyne in a rubber boat and demands a 5-star hotel. Well, there's a few 5-star hotels in Newcastle. And I don't know if there's a few, but there's some nice hotels in Newcastle. I've been down there a few times. And yeah, you should just rock up and say, can I stay the night? I'm a refugee, see what they do. TC mentions that there was a Pink Ladies demonstration out in Whitehall today, demonstrating for the safety of our British Christian children. The National Housing Party UK press office says stop permanent settlement immigration, by which is meant the idea that if you come here legally and you hang around for 5 years, then after 5 years you can apply for permanent settlement. Absolutely crazy. Mental. It dates from the 1971 Immigration Act, when Edward Heath thought that would be a good idea for goodness knows why. And it's still with us, even with massively increased levels of mass immigration, utterly ridiculously increased levels of mass immigration. And so it's not, with indefinite leave to remain comes all the welfare benefits as well, And so that has to be stopped. And I noticed that Reform UK have been setting the woods on fire by saying that they are going to abolish indefinite leave to remain, and anybody on it won't be able to apply for permanent settlement. Although they do say that you'll be able to apply for British citizenship after living here for 7 years. Well, that's not really ideal, because people are just going to hang around for 7 years instead of 5 years. So if you're going to abolish indefinite leave to remain, then what you need to do is to say, oh, and British citizenship, if you want that, sorry, that's a distant hope. You might get that after 20, 25 years permanent settlement, legal settlement. But don't just abolish indefinite leave to remain and say, oh yeah, but you can still be a British citizen if you just hang on for another year. I mean, that's kind of defeating the purpose. Nobody's pointed that out other than at A Force for Good. I haven't seen that anywhere, but it's all, of course, written up in our book, Protect Our Country, a big book for the Union. And if you want to buy it, you can actually scan this QR code. Check this out, folks. We've got a QR code. There you go. Scan that and you can buy. We'll just leave that up there for the moment, and scan that, and it'll get taken straight to the Amazon bookshop. Stephen believes there is a plan behind things. The aim of the cultural Marxist left, he says, is to erase the heritage UK and replace it with a new multinational country composed of people from the rest of the world. Richie says, did anybody see the copper in Newcastle upon Tyne pull that wee lassie over and steal her Union flag, rip it up and bin it? The flag millions of our forefathers fell for. I did see that video, and what was ironic about that was he was a police liaison officer. That's a blue vest, And the blue vests are meant to be the diplomatic interface between the public and the yellow vests. And the blue vests are chosen for their communication skills and their diplomatic skills when dealing with people at protests. And the blue vests are a good idea, although that particular blue vest didn't seem to have got the memo, shall we say. I'm not sure he knew what his particular role in that was. It certainly wasn't to do what he did. Catherine says, well said, keep Scotland Scottish and British. Martin says, good evening, Alistair and fellow patriots. Callum says, Keir Starmer was asked well, the question, I think what Keir Starmer was saying was what constitutes a mandate for a referendum? And that's a big question. We have explained it. We have explained it in our other book, One Big Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 1. We explained exactly how a mandate could be achieved. And it's not easy, I have to tell you, Callum, if you want to know how a mandate is achieved, it would be very difficult for the SNP to actually get a significant mandate. And so I think Starmer was saying, well, what does a mandate involve? Really, it's not just getting a majority of MPs or even just a majority of votes. It has to be something considerably more substantial than that. Yes, as Stephen says, why should 30% of the Scottish electorate force their agenda on the majority? Hello to Rafa. So we've got our guest coming up in 2 or 3 minutes, and that's going to be Avellina Balestri. Before I bring on Avellina, I just want to talk about this. Wanted full-time migrant wedding planner. Wanted full-time migrant wedding planner from the Daily Telegraph. 13th of September. Somebody sent it to me. And the Home Office is advertising for a manager to advise detained illegal migrants on how to get married and organize their weddings. And it's a full-time post at the Campsfield Immigration Removal Centre, which is a new accommodation block near Oxford that will house up to 560 foreign criminals, failed asylum seekers, and migrants facing deportation. So these are genuinely illegals, people who need to leave. The courts have decided that they have to be deported. Before they can be deported, though, they have to go to this detention centre. These days, they have to go to this detention centre. But while they're there, if they decide they want to get married, then they're going to have it's called a religious affairs manager who's going to be able to advise them how to get married. So basically, in other words, this is just the British government or the British modern government all over. They stick them in this detention centre and they give them the opportunity to get married, knowing full well that if they get married, then they've got a right to stay in the country, or they've got a legal argument at least to stay in the country. If they get married to a British citizen somehow, by hook or by crook, then they will then be able to say, you can't deport me because I've got my human rights under the Article 8 family right to a life. I'm now married. You can't deport me. And if I was in charge, I'd say, yeah, we can deport you and you can take your wife with you. But because I'm not in charge, what then happens is that the authorities scratch their head and they go, oh, I guess you'll have to stay here then. But we're actually giving these people the opportunity to get married while they're in the last chance saloon, the deportation centre. It beggars belief. It beggars belief. As this there are currently, it says here, some 2,500 places in immigration removal centres, which are also being used to house some 100 Channel migrants detained before they are deported under the government's new one-in, one-out deal with France. Since being contacted by the Telegraph, the Home Office has taken down the advert. However, it is understood that any recruits who are consequently employed will still be required to oversee marriage preparations if any migrant sought to wed while still in custody. Welcome to modern Britain. And that's why we like our history, because there's no anxiety in history. Ed Dorn, the American poet, said that there's no anxiety in the past, there's only anxiety thinking about the future. And so when we go and we look at history, we can learn from it and hopefully apply the lessons. And one of the great guests on our show is Avellina Balestri, all the way from Maryland, who is an expert on the American War of Independence, or as I like to call it, the American War of Separation. Please welcome Avellina.
Hi, Alistair. How are you doing?
Doing well tonight, Avellina. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you once again for having me.
Yeah, for another round of your fascinating historical speeches about lectures, as it were, about British soldiers who fought in that period in mainly the 18th century. And who are you going to talk about tonight?
So tonight I will be talking about Major John Andre from the American Revolutionary period. I know last time we said we were going to do Sir Hugh Mackay, but maybe next time. But the reason why I began to think Andre would be more appropriate is that tomorrow is his death date, on October 2nd. So to start off with Major John Andre, as you had mentioned before the program started, when we first mentioned him, you were saying his name is French, and that's very true because his parents were actually immigrants. They were Huguenot refugees. His mother was actually born in France. His father was born in Switzerland, but he came from the wider diaspora of the French Huguenot community. So, in brief history, there's a lot to it. There were a lot of religious tensions, persecutions, and wars up and down Europe. And in France, in particular, the effects were felt by the French Calvinists, who were the Huguenots, who often tangled with and were often persecuted by various French Catholic monarchs. And it depended. It went back and forth. You also had Huguenots who were involved in risings themselves, as well as, massacres against Huguenots. But it was very, very difficult, the point is, to be a Huguenot in France during this time period. And so quite a few of them immigrated to other parts of Europe, or to the British Isles particularly, became very welcoming towards French Huguenot refugees under the houses of Hanover, actually, very much so. So you see that with regards to George II, and George III continued this policy of being very welcoming to them. And they also settled in various parts of the colonies, the American colonies, and there's lots of people with descendancy from them. And when you think of like Paul Revere, for example, his name also has that French origin. So these were all descendants of kind of the French Huguenot refugee immigrant population that spread out across different parts of the British Empire. So it is one of the things of the movements of peoples. I kind of say it all started when Adam left the Garden of Eden, and it's been going ever since. And so,
Well, it seems to have been speeding up recently, at least in my
yeah,
neck of
no,
the woods,
definitely.
anyway.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. There's, and it kind of goes though. It's been through all time when you get down to it, and as we're talking about now, with this sort of fits and starts, and different things happen in world events, and different people, set off looking for new
What's
security, new
interesting?
opportunities.
Yeah, well, what's interesting with John Andre, as we say there, he just to locate him in his time period, he was born in 1750 and died a young man in 1780 under traumatic circumstances, which I know you're going to tell us about. But he was an example of what you just mentioned there, immigrants who very much appeared to have integrated into the British cultural way of things, to the point of fighting for the British army, as it were. But please go ahead and tell us more.
Certainly. So yes, so John Andre was reared mostly in London, and as a young man, he ends up joining the army in the aftermath of kind of a failed romance, actually. So he kind of does the, French Foreign Legion thing, where it's like, I will go and join the army. And so he does that. His father was quite a prosperous merchant at the time. So he could have gone into, and he did for a little while assist his father with that end of business, but he kind of wanted to get out of town for a little while with regards to what happened. And also he genuinely seems to have been attracted by the prospect of honor and glory and chivalry connected to the armed forces and a military commission. So he ends up in North America during the American Revolution. He serves in Canada for some time and ends up captured by the American revolutionaries. And he's held as a prisoner for some time, and there's all kinds of little stories about that. I'm not going to go into great detail, but he's held as a prisoner by different people. He's moved around a lot. Treatment varies, but in the good side of things, the good treatment, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for example, he ended up housed with a family. And becoming quite close with the family. We have lots of charming little stories about him, like playing marbles with the kids and stuff like that, going fishing with the kids, becoming quite close with their then eventually teenage son. And basically he really plugged into them, and various other people that he made a good impression on. He was a very charming, vivacious, creative, artistic person. Someone who I've always connected to because I think we share a personality type in terms of like ENFP, very kind of extroverted and creative personality type. He, did a little bit of everything. He was a dabbler. He loved art and music and all kinds of arts and crafts and making things, theater and literature and poetry, and he was just full of all of these interests. And you see it throughout his life. Wherever he was always involved in artistic projects of some type or other. And he was very big on sketching and drawing, and he would carry around a sort of art kit, effectively, of a sketch pad and so forth with him, where mostly where he went. And people who knew him well would say he had this kind of sing-song warbling voice, and would hum tunes under his breath and things of this nature. And
those qualities then mark him out for what he eventually became, which I know you'll mention, which is basically a spy, a kind of secret agent almost. Am I correct in saying that?
An intelligence admin. So
okay.
So I think that's distinct from being a spy. And this becomes a whole thing later on. But he, at this point in time, right? So after he ends up getting released, so he gets, there's an exchange, there's a negotiation, and he is released back to the British Army. He ends up serving on the staff of General William Howe. He ends up down in Philadelphia. And he becomes, again, renowned very much for both being quite an effective young officer under Howe. He's good. He's very he's good with both work and play, effectively. He's very diligent when it comes to the work end of things, and being that kind of assistant and aide figure for the general. And also he, takes part in all of these social endeavors in Philadelphia. And he is involved in also various night raids and battles and skirmishes as well, both when he was in Canada and, I'm just going to kind of give a very brief summary because I can't go through it all. But basically he was involved in different things. He was involved in night raids. He was involved in actual warfare, the point is. So he did these sort of night raids and skirmishes and things of that nature. But when he was back in Philadelphia, he spent a ton of time amidst the loyalist Americans who were there, who had gone there basically for safe haven once the British army had occupied the city. And so he spent a lot of time with them, became very good friends with a lot of them, including one young lady who will play a role later, Peggy Shippen. And so he kind of played the field with the loyalist ladies of the city, and he dated around and was famously just doing all kinds of activities with them and taking them on sleigh rides when winter hit, and doing theme parties and all of this stuff, and drinking huge amounts of tea. They said even for the period, he was like a real highly caffeinated individual, effectively. He's just constantly downing tea, cup after tea, cup after tea. And so it just added to his energetic personality. And he opened up in Philadelphia this turned a warehouse into a theater, and starts, producing all of these plays and things of that nature, and so forth. The social event that he's most famous for is the one that he helped organize, this huge thing, when William Howe was going to be recalled to England. So Andre creates this lavish, he and other people, but he was the head of it. He was the motivating feature and organized a lot of it, and sort of set it up. This big thing that basically was in part like a Ren fair. So he resurrected jousting, basically, and he participated in the jousting, which is pretty awesome. And so he created a whole little sketch of things. He organized the costumes, and he had all the ladies dressed like Turkish women, because he was inspired by these medieval sort of descriptions of medieval court celebrations that you would have in France.
And so getting back though to his actual military activity, which led him to his demise, can we
we'll hop up to New York. So that was the famous thing he did down there. Then up in New York, he ends up in New York. So in New York, he ends up on the staff of General Henry Clinton, who may have been one of our boys, in the sense of Clinton may have been born here on this side of the pond. It's a bit debated, but anyway, he ends up on his staff, and so he serves him in that capacity. And he gets involved in various different things. One of those things is yes, the admin intel work with regards to British intelligence. And so that's part of his work. Otherwise, he also is involved in things like prisoner exchange, etc. So while on the one hand, he's processing, for example, actual spies who come in and they get information to him, and there's codes and so forth. And he does a lot of the desk work and the back and forth with those spies that are sent out. And, because he's an admin, that's his job, is admin position. And at the same time, he's doing things with regards to prisoner exchange. Now, when it comes to the prisoner exchange element, he has a pretty good reputation. Obviously, prison situations at this time are never very good, especially for randos who are not officers. And the British prison ships were pretty infamous for a reason, especially up in New York. But he has a fairly good reputation. And one brief story that highlights this is, then this was recorded by the people who were involved, of the two kids. I say kids, but they were like 14 or 15. They, on impulse, jump in with some revolutionaries who were going off to fight the British, and there was a skirmish, and they get captured. They get taken to New York. They're going to be put on a prison ship, and the likelihood of survival is just pretty low. And so it turns out one of them has a panic attack, effectively, and this young British officer, this is the person who had the panic attack is describing it later. This young British officer comes over and looks at them with compassion and is like, what is it? And he's saying, I was just with my family happily earlier today, and I will never see them again. So this young British officer gets moved. He takes the kid's hand and says, man up, don't cry anymore. And then he turns to the guards and say, don't touch these two until I come back. And he goes off. And then the guard basically says, so then the young kid, the teen says, who was that? He says, because he's the only person here in this group who's looked at me not like an enemy, but like a brother, and looked at me with compassion. And he said, you should thank your lucky stars, the guard says, because that was Major Andre, and he's probably gone to go beg you off to the general, like he's done for so many of your other rebel kind. And so Andre comes back and he basically says, well, I've got good news. I've got good news for you. So the general told me that I can essentially have possession of you to do whatever I want with you. And what I want is for you to run away. So he basically says to them, and then he gives them this little, according to the kid again, he gives them this little mini sermon effectively, which was just in a way strange for some people to think about, because Andre got very into party life. He kind of has a reputation for various affairs and being in this sort of party swing of things. But he was also raised by a pious Huguenot family, and he was religiously educated in Geneva. So this has a sense. So he gives them this little effective sermon, which basically is, go home, fear God, keep the commandments, love one another and your family, and the Lord will bless you. Now go. And so they do, and they survive, and they live to tell the tale. So that's that. And then, there's the real famous thing, which I don't really want to spend a lot of time on because it's so done to death. But effectively, Andre gets into communication via Peggy Shippen, who is kind of, one of the many loyalist girls he'd dated back in Philly. She's now married to the Revolutionary General Benedict Arnold. And so it turns out Arnold is not too pleased with his experiences in the Revolutionary service at this point. Keep in mind, I would say this, Arnold was not a very good person, period, no matter what side he was on at what point. He just wasn't. He was very much out for Arnold. Whatever Arnold thought was going to benefit Arnold, Arnold did. So Arnold essentially has decided, hey, maybe it would benefit me more to go back over to the British side. So effectively, he is communicating now. Andre, as the intel admin, is communicating in code with Arnold about this possible transaction. And what does Arnold want? Well, Arnold wants loads of money. And Arnold also wants a commission in the regular British Army. And he wants a position at court, the royal court. So, he wants pretty much everything he can get out of this deal. And in exchange, he will help the British capture West Point and potentially George Washington himself. Hey, that could really help winning the war. So they kind of agree, hey, yeah, this dude sounds like he's got some important things. We don't care if he's a skunk. He can give us important things. So and of course to them, I'm like, which I'll convince that. So anyway, so then he ends up, yes, going to meet Arnold. He goes to meet Arnold. Arnold has hot paperwork. Arnold essentially says, hey, man, I'm not going to carry this hot paperwork. Once the ship they were supposed to meet, so we're supposed to go together to meet this British ship and get out of there. But then the ship got kind of forced to back off and go away once the revolutionary guns opened up on them. So they get stranded there. And so Arnold is like, hey, man, I'm not taking that. Sorry. And so Andre now is going to have to be the one to either leave the paperwork on the table, or he's going to have to pick it up and take it himself. But he's stuck behind enemy lines at this point. He was just supposed to go as a negotiator. He wasn't supposed to do this. And so then Arnold, because he's Arnold, says to him, buddy, why don't you change out of your uniform so you'll be less likely to be caught? And he says, well, that's a terrible idea. I shouldn't do that. Because, of course, being caught out of your uniform, on the books and in the letter of the law, you're technically considered a spy, even if you didn't go intending to be a spy. And he's like, I don't really want to take that risk, man. And so, but Arnold is like, well, you either do that or you leave the paperwork here. So you got to make a decision here, buddy. And so Andre eventually is like, okay, I'll do it. And so he does it against his better judgment. And down the road, there's all kinds of stuff that happens. Like literally, he gets a guide to try to get him from point to point. And the guide recalls that Andre talked his ear off about everything high speed, which I'm just like, yeah. And he starts just talking about like art and music and stuff. And I'm just like, that would be me. There is no question. And so he's finally thinking he's almost out of the situation. But then he gets stopped on the road by these guys who are basically like, in this time period, everything like order was a bit devolving. So you kind of had outlaw brigand type people who were like flavored one way or another. So they were either flavored patriot or loyalist, right? So these guys jump out at him and it looks like they may intend to rob him. And so he nervously decides, hey, I assume that you're one of us. And he just starts to chatty Cathy his way into oblivion and basically gives himself away to these outlaws who, for some reason, a couple of different things, like the way they were dressed, he thought they were loyalists. They aren't. Yeah. They're patriot-flavored brigands. So they take him in. They find the paperwork on him in his boot, basically. And so it's like, okay, things are going very, very wrong now. And so he ends up being taken in, and he has now been caught out of uniform, and the big Arnold plan is just completely down the tubes now.
Well,
Arnold's has gotten away.
To cut a long story short, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, but what then happened to him as a consequence?
Right. So as a consequence, he gets brought before a board of inquiry / tribunal. It's all a little fishy, but suffice to say, they condemn him as a spy. They throw out of court his efforts to make an extenuating circumstance plea. He isn't represented by any kind of proper legal counsel either. So he effectively is toast meal before he even gets in there. Because the thing is, they wanted revenge. That was really what it came down to. Even if he could have had the best extenuating circumstance case in the world, and I personally think he did have a reasonable case, at least to try to make, he was never going to get the chance to properly make it, because the fact is they needed to have somebody that they could punish for Arnold being a traitor. But the thing is when you start to pick that apart, certainly from, if you're looking at it from the loyalist perspective, it's like, right, so these guys who are all traitors on this board, like they are saying this one guy who was one of our traitors is now a traitor to our treason, and we want to punish this other guy who didn't commit treason of any type. Okay, so that's basically what happened. So they end up saying, we're going to hang John Andre unless the British turn over Benedict Arnold. And so the Clinton really wants Andre back. He's close with him. He's friends, but he can't do that because that would really put a very bad precedent. So what we end up with here is that Andre beseeches at this point. He thinks, okay, I'm toast. They're going to kill me, but please don't hang me. I just shoot me. Don't hang me. Both because he clearly was a bit concerned about, the strangulation elements, but also because he thought it would be a disgrace to his family. And so he begs them, please don't just shoot me. But no, they're going to hang him anyway. So then the lead up, I'm going to just try to wrap. And then in the thing, they basically get him on the day of it, and he goes out and he sees the scaffold, and he has something of a mini panic attack where he gets shuddery and has struggled to breathe. And this one guy next to him is like, why this sudden emotion, sir? Which I think is the most annoying thing ever. And then he's like, I was accepting of my death, but I despise the mode. But he calms himself down enough, and he self-talks himself through it, and he's like, it will be a momentary pang. He's just going to have to believe this. And so he goes up there onto the scaffold, and he puts the blindfold over his own eyes, puts the noose around his own neck, and he makes this speech, which, again, brief summary of it is essentially, I am dying. Since I am dying for my king and my country, I must consider this the hour of my death, the most glorious hour of my life. And, I pray that you all bear witness I die like a brave man. So, he does. And fortunately for him, his neck snaps. It was actually a momentary pang. It was a quick exit. So that happens. And then afterwards, it is said that they found a hymn that had been written by Andre in his own hand. It was an English hymn that he had penned, it seems, the night before from memory. I'm just going to read briefly that, and then I will be done. So it's a hail sovereign love which first began this scheme to rescue fallen man. Hail matchless free eternal grace that gave my soul a hiding place. Against the God who built the sky, I fought with hand uplifted high, despised the mention of his grace, too proud to seek a hiding place. Enwrapped in thick Egyptian night, and fond of darkness more than light, madly I ran the sinful race, secure without a hiding place. But thus the eternal counsel ran, Almighty love, arrest that man. I felt the arrows of distress, and found I had no hiding place. Indignant justice stood in view. To Sinai's fiery mount I flew, but justice cried with frowning face, this mountain is no hiding place. Ere long a heavenly voice I heard, and mercy's angel soon appeared. He led me on with gentle pace to Jesus as a hiding place. Should sevenfold storms of thunder roll and shake this earth from pole to pole, no flaming bolt shall daunt my face, for Jesus is my hiding place. On him almighty vengeance fell, which must have sunk a world to hell. He bore it for a sinful race, and thus became their hiding place. A few more rolling suns at most shall land me safe on Canaan's coast, where I shall sing the song of grace and see my glorious hiding place. Exalt the Lord, his praise proclaim. Let every saint now raise his name. Forevermore we'll see his face, the face of Christ, our hiding place. So that was the hymn, and then he ends up years and years later. He was buried on the spot afterwards, but years and years later, he ends up, his body moved back to Britain and to Westminster Abbey, where he has this beautiful, a beautiful marble, tomb basically to his honor, and it was raised in his honor by King George III.
Yes.
He had a great deal of affection for the king, and the king had a great deal of affection for him, as we can see. Loyalty, nodding to loyalty on that one. So
absolutely.
there it is.
Just upon that, that's a good way to finish today. That's the memorial at Westminster Abbey, and it says, sacred to the memory of Major John Andre, who raised by his merit at an early period of life to the rank of Adjutant General of the British forces in America, and employed in an important but hazardous enterprise, fell a sacrifice to his zeal for his king and country on the 2nd of October, 1780, aged 29, universally beloved and esteemed by the army in which he served, and lamented even by his foes. His gracious sovereign King George III has caused this monument to be erected. So I was surprised when I saw that he even had that, because I had never heard of him before. Interestingly enough, I've heard of Benedict Arnold, because
Andre deserves the fame so much more, and it's a tragedy to me how it seems like most people who've heard of Andre know it from really bad pop culture depictions of him, like in Turn, AMC's Turn, where they have him say, "I'm not dying for king or country, I'm dying for a woman," and other idiocy. So I just want to say, don't listen to Turn. Do not trust Turn to give you a good impression of Major John Andre. He was vastly better as a human being, way more based. Like, please don't believe Turn.
Okay. Well, great stuff as always. You've introduced another British hero to our minds and awareness that we did not know, a Huguenot of all people, who fought very patriotically for the British, but unfortunately got himself into a bit of a sticky situation, whereupon he was considered to be a spy and hung by his neck, which is an unfortunate end for a chap who was only 29 years old and no doubt thought he was doing the right thing. So that's just what happened. So TC says here, Benedict Arnold is buried in a church in Battersea, southwest London. I did not know that.
Yes, he's buried next to a fish tank. He's buried next to a fish tank, funnily enough. I've seen pictures of it, and it's sort of like, I think it's a Sunday school now, that area, and there's a fish tank right next to it. Which I'm like, well, there's worse things, there's worse things than being buried next to a fish tank in a quaint sort of English Sunday school room.
Absolutely, you get around at the end of the day, even in death. But okay, Avellina, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alistair.
Remains for me to say, you do have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/@ Avellina Balestri. For those of you listening on audio only, that's AVELLINA BALESTRI. lots of interesting stuff there, including your
There's a version of the
efforts and so on.
Hail Sovereign Love on there as well. There's a version of that on there if anyone's interested.
Oh, really? Well, what we'll do is when we put this, we'll put the full interview up next week, and we'll include a link to that song. Thank you for telling me. It doesn't surprise me that you've turned that one into a video as well. So, folks, just that's Avellina. No doubt you'll be back on with new people in the future. Always glad to.
We'll get back around to Sir Hugh Mackay.
Absolutely, we can do. Okay, Avellina, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
There in Maryland. Bye-bye.
Bye. God bless.
Fantastic. Avellina Balestri, a friend of the show and always a very interesting historian, as well as musician. Good. Now, if you see up there, that is a QR code which you can scan. And if you scan it, you'll get taken to the Amazon link for this book, Protect Our Country. Or you can simply just search Amazon for Protect Our Country. This QR code is something that StreamYard have just introduced this week. And we'll change that one to our union supporters one now as well. If you want to become a monthly donor from 69 pence a week, go to aforceforgood.uk/union-supporters or scan the QR code. And you'll get taken straight to that. And we do have a few monthly donors, and depending on how much you donate per month, you can request various rewards, anything from badges to WeBooks, to magazines, back issues of our magazines, Union Heart, and so on and so forth. So please do consider becoming a union supporter. It really does help. And if you'd simply like to just maybe buy something, we'll change that QR code now to the QR code for the shop. That's it there. That's the shop where you can get things like this little badge. At the QR code. At the shop, as well as other things as well. We sold a few items recently, I'm always glad to say. So folks, we're going to be back next week. We're going to have a new guest next week. Somebody who's been quite heavily involved in the actions outside the various hotels in Scotland, going to be a guest next week for the first time ever on our show. Looking forward to that particular person. You'll find all about that next week, same time, 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock. So in the meantime, it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.